call our meeting to order this morning. We have 3 witnesses on Act 250, starting with Mr. Larson.
Is this it?
Good morning.
Good morning, Ed.
Beautiful day. Great day. I'm Ed Larson. I'm here representing the Vermont Forest Products Association. Thank you very much for allowing me to testify. I know you're working on a very large, comprehensive rewrite of Act 250. It's huge. I'm not exactly sure where you are in your process because I am visiting other committees because it's been a busy year for us. I'm here to try to narrow my comments and thoughts to just a couple of the topics you're dealing with and not get into the whole thing. It's just not my purview. But thank you very much for doing that. I represent an association that has all aspects of the forest products industry in its membership, from the landowner to the secondary end user, just before it gets to the consumer. So that would include landowners, foresters, logging contractors, trucking contractors, sawmills, paper mills, biomass plants, furniture makers, and all those that add value to our forest product. Testified last year. I had a fairly big PowerPoint presentation. I decided not to bring that in again this year and just have a conversation. I will refer to that. I did print out a couple of the slides with some of the narrative just so I'm reminded to stay on message and stay on point.
And that would be great, because where we are is trying to dig in deep and make decisions. So if you said it last year, we can refer back to your testimony.
Okay.
With your comments on the new.
Well, I will repeat myself a little bit from last year just to kind of make some emphasis on some of our concerns and interests. That's okay, because it's important to me and I think to you. So I will be talking about the piece that deals with that fragmentation review. I will be talking about the proposal from the governor and VNRC that talks about conditions of a permit for forest operations, and then a couple other jurisdiction pieces, such as ridge tops and things like that. So that's kind of where I'm going to focus most of my stuff. I don't have, we don't have a position on whether you should have 9 commissions or 6 commissions or 1 commission or anything like that. My only comment in that area is that we do seek consistency. It is important, and there are differences between the commissions as far as how they view a permit application and what they do with it. But we don't have a position that would guide you or suggest where we think you should go with that. So that was very helpful there. We had our annual meeting last Saturday, so I have a lot of input from folks. There were about 50 business owners or high-level managers at this meeting, and this was one of the topics that was in my report, and so I have some feedback from them to share with you, gave me some good direction. In the area of fragmentation, we don't think that fragmentation, a review of fragmentation in Act 250 is the right way to go. Let me start by just saying, I think we've done a good job understanding how important forests are. They're very important. I think there's a consensus here in this building and throughout the state that our forests are very important for all the benefits that it provides to us. And we're all on the same page there. We also are very mindful of the intent to try to find ways to keep parcels intact, keep them as large as we can, because there are a lot of benefits to Vermont, our citizens, our wildlife, and to our industry to have that. But the solutions that we have seen so far, we don't agree with, we don't think work. The proposal that you're looking at will not work. It will not stop fragmentation, it will not even slow it down. In fact, there's a possibility it might accelerate it. And that's what we're very mindful of. And we're very fearful that the consequences of such a review how landowners respond could be very negative.
Can you help us understand why you think it could accelerate?
Okay, a landowner has 100 acres, becomes desperate for money for whatever reason. Doesn't matter, it could be medical reason, education, whatever it is. So a landowner finds a developer and attempts to sell 20 acres. Developer says, okay, I can make 8, 9 lot subdivision, maybe a 10 lot subdivision out of that. But landowner, I have to pay about $10,000 more because you're in a forest block or a habitat connector in order to get that permit. So I'm going to give you $10,000 less for your 20 acres.
Well, to be clear, that we're not changing the jurisdictional trigger for that
Right.
criteria.
Well, I am moving to that trigger. It will require an Act 250 permit for what this developer has in mind. This is my scenario I'm trying to create. And because that review adds cost to obtaining that permit, the value of that land goes down. The landowner does not get the same amount of money the landowner would have gotten had there not been a review for fragmentation. So the landowner's response could be, will you buy 30 acres? So I need to get a certain amount of money. Landowners will respond that way. Does that mean we solved the problem? No, I think we've increased fragmentation because of the value of the property going down. See, once the landowner accepts $10,000 less for that 20 acres, and that continues to go, fair market value in general for large forest blocks will go down in value. And for industry land, and I had testified to you before that just in my membership, which is not the entire industry, I'm able to count well over 500,000 acres of ownership. That's industry land. And for them, equity matters. Equity is important. They need that leverage, borrowing power, what have you, to operate their business. So they're very concerned about equity. So, 1, it won't work. 2, land values go down. That's why we do not support this provision in Act 250. The solution, the only solution, is our industry, for the people I'm representing. We give the landowner money for their trees. And if we give them enough money for their trees, they're happy growing trees. And they won't be thinking about development. We would like to stop that landowner by the incentive of management of growing trees, and we give money for those trees instead of trying to sell 20 acres because that landowner is desperate for money. So that's, we think that is a solution. So that's why we oppose fragmentation. We are, I understand forestry is not regulated anywhere in this bill, which is good. I appreciate that. Except above 2,500 feet, we do have to get an Act 250 permit. One of the comments that I got from the landowners that, and foresters, because we had a number of foresters that have worked with the landowner and a developer, well, in this case it would be a logger, to harvest timber above 2,500 feet. And to them, it seems kind of crazy to go through the same 10 criteria as you do if you're building a factory or 10-lot subdivision. The review should be different. We understand the wildlife review, the Section 8 reviews, but there's a lot of other things in there that just doesn't make sense. And we also find that commissioners don't do this often enough, don't have the knowledge base enough to really understand what it is we're trying to accomplish when we prescribe and decide to do a timber harvest above 2,500 feet. So that's our comment on that. But we're not here to say we should eliminate that. We're just here to say that that's a good conversation to have, and perhaps different criteria should be used that's more understandable and more relevant to the impact that we're all trying to protect. So that's the fragmentation piece. I'm
We have
happy
a
to
question for you.
respond to
Yeah,
that.
I'm trying to understand the forest fragmentation comments. It seems to me that if we trigger Act 250 and forest fragmentation and more like forest blocks and corridors, one of the criteria, wouldn't we end up with a better project? And probably protect forests along like corridors, which really, in fact, ends up protecting your industry, the forest products industry. So I don't understand your comment.
Well, it's a yes and no. It could or it may not. Now, because of, and I have not been through the Act 250 process personally, so I don't have a lot of experience, but I have been to a number of hearings, and I have been trying to listen to those of my industry that have gone through it. Oftentimes, conditions of your permit and the workability of your project is influenced by the neighbors. So to reduce, or what is the word, to avoid or minimize fragmentation, you want to be as close to the road as possible, stay out of the reaches of the forest block or into the habitat connector. But then you could be very close to your neighbors. So the desire of the project would be to get away from the neighbors, to be further in, to be away from where some of your noise, your dust, the trucking, all the activities that go around manufacturing for us would be difficult. For housing, yes. I mean, for residential development, staying along the road makes a lot of sense. It's economical, and you're right, you will get a better product. But when I'm looking at the types of applications my industry would be working on, other than the logging, harvesting above 2,500 feet, would be to build a plant, and or a log yard, or something else that would trigger the Act 250 permit. And we try to be respectful of our neighbors and give us some distance to them. So it could have an impact on that.
As a follow-up to that, I guess I'm not talking about logging, because over 2,500 feet, that's
No, you're not.
exempt.
And neither am I.
So
Right.
I'm talking about development. I'm talking about
And I am
managing
too.
development.
A sawmill is a development which would trigger an Act 250 permit. A biomass plant, a pellet manufacturer, even a fairly good-sized concentration yard, because you have impervious soils. You'll have you're going to take up 10 acres. Could involve primary soils. It could trigger the need for a review for a permit. So those are the types of projects that our members would be involved with, and where the need to get away from the neighbors is good neighborly. It's the right thing to do. And that would trigger that fragmentation piece. So that's an example.
Yeah, but your example is actually creating fragmentation.
It is.
We don't want it.
I understand that. But this won't work. And then what are you going to do?
Oh, I disagree. Thank you.
This, what are you going to do then? When you realize that fragmentation is going to be continued at the same rate that it is now, which is not earth-shattering. It's less than 1% a year. It's 0.1% a year of acres that are being developed from these large parcels. So we're hearing numbers are different now, but they're not. They're the same. They do change a little bit with the economy and social values, but for the most part, it's been pretty consistent, and it's not huge. But it happens. When this doesn't work, then what are we going to do? We'll have this review. We'll have this added cost, and we will have this lower valued land, and we didn't fix it. So that's my opinion, but that's the consensus of my industry. That's our statement.
And I have since we're talking about logging, have you gone through the joint proposal that was unveiled this session?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about the 60-day flexibility as far as hours of operation for the industry?
The entire section on conditions of a permit for forest operations is very important to us. That is an important piece. It's not, I looked at a couple of examples, and we walked through a couple of examples on Saturday. Ray Colton Enterprises down in Pittsfield is a perfect example. You have, the 60-day period is fine. I think that it should be a minimum of 60 days. There may be years we can need more, but that's okay. The part about no conditions on hours of operation, it is conditioned on a review of criteria 1, 5, and 8. Okay, 1 is air pollution, which includes noise. 5 is traffic, and 8 is wildlife and aesthetics and things like that. If indeed you allow for hours of operation, but because of traffic or noise, we're going to limit you, I look at Colton's example, this wouldn't solve he would have the same conditions. It would not improve the situation for an operation that has neighbors, that's on a highway, that Route 100 makes a lot more noise than the mill does. But because you're dealing with ambient as well as the influence of noise on the operation, when the highway is running and your meter's recording and your operation's running, you're going to exceed the limits that they put on you, which then of course is going to constrain your hours of operation. And there's nothing they can do other than the fact that we should totally waive that provision so that they can operate when they need to operate, so that they can get the wood in off the land while it's frozen at night, and they can chip their products for their heating system into a soundproof building anytime during the year that they need to, so that they can operate. They need to be competitive and they need to operate, and they're providing a tremendous service to our people in Vermont. The firewood operation is huge. So it's important, but I'd like to see it changed a little. I'd like to see some relief on those 3 criteria. I don't know how you're going to get there, but that's important to us.
One follow-up question. As the situation remains today, is the industry looking at a lack of supply?
There is not a lack of supply. We have challenges in the marketplace, though, finding the markets. It's not as bad as it was a few years ago. I am finding I have 2 logging. I'm a forester. I have 2 logging operations going right now, and I'm starting a 3rd this weekend. And I'm getting the landowner's at least getting a fair price for its low grade, for its pulp. Before they were getting nothing. Now they're getting at least a few dollars a ton. So there are markets. The loggers are pulling the wood, and they are able to find places to put the low grade. But the prices are low. They're not great, and we'd like to see that improve. But the industry is coming along pretty good right now, pretty solid. A few hiccups, but the fragile nature of our business is the marketplace, finding markets, because they change quickly. The new job I have started has a lot of white pine on it, and the white pine mills fill up very fast in the winter. And if we don't get that out of the woods and into the mills before the end of February, then we won't have a market for that pine until next year. It's just the nature of the business. It's how we operate. I think I represent some of the most resilient people in the state of Vermont, how they operate. The way the weather changes all the time, the way the markets change all the time, the amount of capital that they have tied up in their business, and yet they still do it, and they're still at it. Pretty strong bunch there. But the conditions of that section, I think, is important. We hope it lives. We hope that you do recognize that. I will say that I'm not a fan of carve-outs. I think that we should be fair to all sectors. And it should be more universal than just choosing our industry and giving us a special treatment. I'm not, one who supports that all the time. But recognizing how important the forest is, recognizing the fact that it's the industry that's going to prevent fragmentation from accelerating, recognizing that it's this industry that's going to keep forest, keep it healthy, keep it free of disease, insects, and fires, and give us the natural beauty and all the other benefits that we get. I think it's a good conversation to have to figure out how to make Act 250 a little bit more business friendly for this sector, and so that we can operate in the challenges we have with weather and traffic and all those other things. So, those are my comments, I thought. I did have one individual at the annual meeting very concerned about the ridgeline stuff. He would love to come in and talk to you. I have 2 other members that said that they were willing to testify to you if indeed you wanted to hear more real-life stories about what their challenges are and what their perception is about this proposal.
When you say the ridgeline proposal, do you mean the joint proposal or the one in our committee bill?
Well, the one he spoke to was the one that was in the proposal, because that was the language that we had up on the slide there and we were looking at. He was trying to understand. He felt it was too broad. He felt that it's going to catch a lot of projects that may not be necessarily what your intention was. I did not get a chance to do a deep dive with him to truly understand that. I'd like to reach out to him, but I asked him if he was willing to come here, and he said he was. He's in Reedsville, so it's a bit of a haul. But, we do have members that are interested in offering their thoughts.
Thank you very much. for
Thank you.
coming in. Oh, did you have another question, Mr. McCollum?
Yeah. And Ed, you're not in favor of carve-outs, but it appears you are in favor of a carve-out
Yes.
for the forestry
The irony.
industry.
There you go. Human nature.
And at the same time, we've already gotten rebuttable presumption a couple of years ago for forest products industry, another carve out, and in spite of our legislative, and I don't just mean this committee, but the legislature as a whole, careful attention to forest products needs. You're also saying please don't have the forest fragmentation and connectivity, and I'm not seeing I'm just not seeing a willingness to work here on our parts. Would you say that's correct?
Well, your point was well taken until your last question there. I'm trying to be at the table. I am trying to be productive. I am trying to be willing to work through this. I'm not saying no to everything. I just don't think that the proposal, particularly on fragmentation, connectivity, it will work.
You are at the table. I can agree with that one, but you aren't saying no to everything. You're saying yes to forest products. Give me with time of operation, which I believe in actually, and so you know. But I'm not seeing any willingness to work, what you just said, on the forest fragmentation, because you are staying on message with last year, and we got it last year, and I've got it this year. So I'm just...
Well, I will not get ahead of my association.
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, I report to them. I work for them.
Yep.
They're my boss.
Yep.
And I take their lead. And indeed, equity is an important part of land ownership to these members. So they continue to have that position. So I'm not going to get ahead of them.
Yeah.
Okay, you have to understand that.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yep.
And I'll sit here and take it because, I love you guys.
Yeah.
It's my job. But, but if it's not going to work, I have to tell you that. If we don't see how landowners are going to respond to this, we work with landowners daily, and they need our options. They need all options. And a bank looks at that. A bank will look at, I'm going to use your land as collateral. What is the value of that land? And what are your options? And if your options are limited, then the value goes down. So that's a fairly simple concept. And some landowners will be fine, but there will be many that won't be fine.
Okay, we
Thank you, Ed.
have one more question from Representative Terenzini.
Ed, nice job on testimony. But you gotta go back and you gotta tell your people that the state of Vermont is just not open for business.
Well, we do have our challenges.
Yeah.
We are down to 16 mills. We had 17 last year, Tom, so it's
Especially with this
it's
community.
hard. We had one mill burned down 5 years ago,
Mhm.
a big one, nice white pine mill, beautiful market, good for where I, in this region.
So we have two more witnesses and actually one more question for you, so
Okay?
Harvey's.
That mill went to New Hampshire.
I don't have a question. I have a suggestion for a potential witness would be Jonathan Wood, who was the past Secretary of A&R, and he was with the Forest and Parks Division for a while, Commissioner, and he's also a private logging consultant.
In last year.
I
No,
didn't
he
see
didn't.
his name on the
Oh.
witness
No, he didn't come in last year. I did
So-
provide his name to you as a
So,
good.
but I think he might shed some light on this discussion from two different angles.
Okay, thanks. All right, thank you very much for coming and
Thank you, Ed.
testifying. We now have Mark Whitworth, Energize Vermont.
I love you guys too.
Back at
Yeah.
Touchy-feely here.
Yeah.
I'm on the record now, aren't I?
And I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning. To be on tonight's news.
Does he have a screen presentation?
Yeah, as soon as okay.
It's it's going.
How am I doing so far? So I represent Energize Vermont, and haven't quite mastered this yet. And we're a volunteer organization with members across the state. And our mission is to promote sensible energy and climate policies that protect our environment and respect our communities. We were originally established to deal with energy issues, but it seems that energy and climate change have become pretty closely related in the minds of Vermonters. Last year, when I appeared before this committee, I described our climate action project, and I'm only going to mention one of our steps. We have a 5-step climate action program, and the first step, and it's no accident that it's the first step, is to protect the natural resources that defend us against the effects of climate change. There have been, since I last came here, there have been a number of disturbing headlines that we've seen in the paper. Human activity places 1 million species at risk. A quarter of humanity faces looming water crises. Our food supply is at dire risk. Birds are vanishing from North America. And there are other stories as well that are equally disturbing. And a common theme in these stories is that they describe the interplay of poor land practices and climate change. Climate change, the effects of climate change are being exacerbated by what we're doing to the land. So what's going to happen in Vermont? We talk a lot about climate change, but I'm not sure that we talk a lot about what we can expect to see. We can expect to see extinctions. We can expect to see loss of food and water security. We can expect to see increased vulnerability to the severe weather events that we're told are going to be more and more frequent. Those severe weather events are going to affect our homes, businesses, farms, our water resources themselves, and our transportation and energy infrastructure. That, by the way, is a pine marten. In case you see one. They're not very big. So, Act 250 is the most important instrument of climate policy that we have in Vermont. It protects our forests and our mountains, and our forests and mountains enable species to adapt to a changing climate, and there's no question in our minds that the climate is changing. It protects, our forests and mountains protect lowlands from severe stormwater events. Act 250 limits high elevation development that upsets hydrological balances, enables floods, raises temperatures, water temperatures, and washes contaminants into headwater streams. In fact, high elevation development counteracts our efforts to clean our lakes. And these pictures on the right are from Lowell. This is before, during, and after the Great Pyramid of Lowell, which turned a cool mountain forest into a hot rock. Our Act 250 protects our agricultural soils, and while we can't be sure what kinds of impacts climate change is going to have on the parts of the country that produce most of our food, we can be sure that we want to grow more of our food here in Vermont. We support a strong Act 250. In particular, we support provisions that would enable climate adaptation, and those include protection of forest blocks and connecting habitat, establishing a 1,500-foot elevation trigger for Act 250, and we understand that there are some proposals that would just protect a swath a few hundred feet on either side of a ridge line. We think that the protection should start at 1,500 feet and go all the way up to wherever the ridge line is. We think that Act 250 should force consideration of cumulative impacts. Right now, we tend to look at developments in isolation from one another. We'd like to close energy development loopholes. We'd like to end land swaps and pay-to-degrade deals where I'll swap this piece of prime bear habitat for this other piece of land that might be okay. We'd like to retain district environmental commissions for all projects.
We have a question from
Sure.
Representative.
Yeah, could you go into a little more detail with the closed energy development loophole? I don't quite understand that.
Right now, Act 250, I'm going to talk about that in a
Okay,
minute.
then I'll
So
wait.
if I don't answer your question, then let's return to it. Enabling climate adaptation. There's an organization, an international organization called the Staying Connected Initiative, that's identified key forest blocks and linkages across northern New England and into from New York all the way up into Canada. And this is one of the linkages that they've identified. It has a choke point in it, and that choke point is in the Northeast Kingdom. In fact, it's in the Representative Lefebvre's hometown. And you recognize it?
But I could. I studied it a little
I
while.
thought I'd give you a plug. That choke point that's the also the location of where the Sheffield and Lowell wind farms are, the turbine complexes, and there were 2 or 3 other wind projects that would have proposed that would have closed that linkage off completely. We can't let that happen. We need to, if we're interested in slowing the progress of extinctions, we need to keep these vital blocks of wildlife habitat and the linkages. We need to protect them. And right now, I'm not sure that Act 250 is up to it. And one of the reasons is because we have loopholes for energy development. Right now, in Vermont, the Public Utility Commission makes energy siting decisions. And their core competency is matters relating to energy, not matters relating to land use. It's not their core competency. I'm not sure that it's their primary interest. I'm not sure that it should be their primary interest. And the Public Utility Commission is required to consider the Act 250 criteria, but they can override them in favor of an undefined public good, whatever that may mean. And we maintain that there is no public good that justifies the degradation of the natural resources that defend us from climate impacts. So we ask that you close that public good loophole. And furthermore, we also believe that energy siting should be placed under the jurisdiction of Act 250. That would end the loophole, close it completely. We also urge you to retain Act 250's regional approach to regulation. You know, for 50 years, Act 250 has been administered by district environmental commissions, and this regional approach makes Act 250 accessible to those who are most affected by the decisions that result from the application of Act 250, and it promotes collaboration among developers, local regional planners, neighbors, and the regulators themselves. Dean Davis warned us about centralizing that decision-making in Montpelier, and that it would undermine public trust in Act 250. And we don't think that this is the time to further erode the public trust in a vital state institution. And that's all. That is the Moose family in fall. It's a photograph by Roger Irwin, who lives in Maidstone. And you know, these two are being photobombed from the back.
Very cool.
Yep. Thanks.
Questions? Questions for Mr. Whitworth? Thank you very much.
All right, I must have explained everything very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have some question.
All right.
I would like you to expand a little bit more regarding your testimony on Act 250 jurisdiction at the beginning at 1,500 feet. And basically, I don't know if you've seen the map that NVDA put out showing the Northeast Kingdom, where about a third of the landmass is above 1,500 feet. And I think it would have my own impression, it would have a very adverse impact on property owners that would have to get a permit to do anything above 1,500 feet. So I'm wondering how you square that.
Well, I think those lands are vital, both for climate adaptation and to protect our water, our freshwater resources. You know, we've seen what happens when development interferes with the headwaters, degrades those headwaters. It has an effect all the way downstream. It has an effect on Lake Champlain, on Lake Memphremagog, and on the Connecticut River. It doesn't end development. It just ensures that development is sensible. You know, a third of my land is above 1,500 feet too, so I appreciate that.
How much land do you have?
550 or 600 acres, somewhere in there. Most of it's above 1,500 feet.
More than your average Vermonter.
Maybe.
Any other questions, Representative McCullough?
You didn't come prepared, perhaps, to answer specific questions about forest fragmentation, but you were in the room where you heard testimony debunking that as a tool, and I'm just wondering if you have a comment about the efficacy of forest fragmentation, regulation, and connectivity habitat, and I've got one other after that.
Yeah, I think we should be trying to maintain intact forests.
Yeah.
I think we should. I think fragmentation should be a criterion under Act 250. I think fragmentation ought to be addressed by our regional and municipal plans.
And the other question, thank you. And the other question is around, there's a section in the joint proposal, and that speaks to the development of long roads that I'm curious if you're aware of that one and what you feel about that.
I'm not familiar with any proposals regarding long roads.
Okay, good, that works. Yep,
Okay.
thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in. Right, excuse me, the League of Cities and Towns would be Karen Horn.
Good morning, thank you. I don't have a presentation to put up there yet, sorry. I think I might get into the weeds a bit more than your previous people who testified. But thank you for the opportunity. I did testify last year on February 13th. I also sent you a letter on April 30th of last year regarding this initiative. We were a little bit surprised to see a draft bill developed by the Agency of Natural Resources and VNRC over the course of the summer that didn't include a lot of other interested parties that are going to be key to the successful functioning of any land use law in Vermont. And we just felt like we needed to put that out there. In many respects, the proposed amendments would further usurp local land use authority, turning the long-standing purpose of Act 200, that planning be taken at the most local level possible, on its head. The second goal established in Chapter 117, the Land Use Planning Statute, is, quote, to encourage citizen participation at all levels of the planning process, and to assure that decisions shall be made at the most local level possible, commensurate with their impact. We're also concerned that, this is a detail, but that the proposal would require municipalities to increase planning and mapping to include water supply and wastewater lines, facilities and service areas, and particularly with respect to lines. Not every municipality even knows where those are. Some of them are quite old, and so that I think that perhaps the community doesn't understand what a significant undertaking that would be to map all your lines.
So, excuse me, that's in the joint proposal under the, is it for the planning, for the downtown exemption part?
It's a separate amendment to the public utility and facility component of Chapter 117.
Was it under the capability and development mapping? I thought we put that into a report.
I think, well,
Joint
I
proposal
can
isn't-
check afterwards, but I believe it's an actual amendment to the municipal planning statutes. As drafted, the Natural Resources Board would be comprised of 5 members, the professional board, including 2 regional commissioners. We urge you to consider 1 regional commissioner and 1 municipal official. Their outlooks on things are quite different. And municipalities are the traditional governmental entities to regulate land use, predating Act 250 by a long shot. There must be deference given to municipal decisions, municipal effort in developing plans and bylaws, and municipal expertise regarding their communities. This is accomplished within the extensive requirements of Chapter 117, the Municipal and Regional Planning Statute. The draft would exempt designated downtowns and neighborhood areas from Act 250, and we strongly support that provision. It would also significantly expand jurisdiction and complicate development in many small towns and rural areas, we believe. These places struggle to remain viable in the face of declining and aging population, difficulty building housing for the missing middle, and an uphill climb to incentivize right-sized economic growth. And the missing middle is a term that's used to describe housing that's available to middle-income people.
Yeah, Representative Squirrel.
Karen, I'm having trouble understanding that last statement.
That it
Somehow
would
we're
significantly
making it more difficult?
We do think that some of the provisions in here, and I'll go into them in a little bit more detail. I'm going to get to that. Would expand jurisdiction in the rural areas. I think it's important to remember that there are 23 designated downtowns and 6 neighborhood areas in the state to which the exemption in the current draft would apply. The new Act 250 provisions would apply to the rest of the state.
Would you repeat that number again, please?
There, I'll send this to you as well. There are 23 designated downtowns and 6 neighborhood development areas. So having said all of that, at the January 16th meeting of the VLCT board, they endorsed the broad concept of a professional natural resources board, and they also supported the exemption from Act 250 for development in at least the designated downtowns and neighborhood areas. We do have a number of questions about the provisions in the bill. A professional board needs to be user-friendly, transparent, respectful of local government priorities, affordable for and responsive to municipalities and citizens, easy to navigate, and result in a shorter, streamlined permitting process. If you're using the Public Utility Commission as a model for this professional board, I caution you that the Public Utility Commission is none of those things. So you might need to look at a different model. A professional board might cut down on time to obtain a permit. It might render more consistent decisions across the state. But to Mark's earlier point, retaining the district commissions in some form would provide for consideration of regional differences across the state. We have a number of concerns around appeals from a natural resources board going to the Supreme Court. What happens in the event a municipal permit is also being appealed? So right now you can have a situation where appeals between municipal permits and Act 250 permits are consolidated at the environmental court. That wouldn't happen if appeals from Act 250 went to the Supreme Court and appeals from municipal permits went to the environmental court. And one of the risks is that you might get very different decisions from those two entities about the same project, and then how would those be reconciled? Let's see. As I mentioned, we do support language that would exempt designated downtowns and neighborhood areas from Act 250, and we believe that should be a complete and a clear exemption, clean exemption. I think that this draft does that, but we do have a few concerns as to if a development is in a flood hazard area or a river corridor area, and it's also in a designated downtown, is the municipality still the one authority that is addressing those permitting proposals? We think that it should be. Municipalities with these designations have gone through an exhaustive and pretty expensive process to demonstrate capacity to administer robust land use regulations and the components of the designation program. This is also true of growth centers, new town centers, and to a lesser extent designated village centers. Cities and towns that have been granted growth center and new town center designation in particular have told us that the benefits really are not there for those programs, especially in consideration of the effort they put into getting those designations. And so we would suggest that you might look at, is the exemption from Act 250 also applicable to growth centers and new town centers? I believe there's only 2 new town centers. Yeah, there are 2 new town centers, Colchester and South Burlington. We also think there needs to be some work done around how pre-existing Act 250 permit conditions are handled in a designated downtown or a neighborhood area, particularly if the conditions on the Act 250 permit were established by the environmental court, and there are quite a few of those. So, we think there just needs to be more conversation about the mechanics of how that all might work.
Do you have suggestions for how the mechanics will work? That's where we're at in this review
Oh,
of the bill.
that is where you are.
Well, I mean, on all the
Okay.
topics, but
Yeah.
we're looking for substantive
Yeah.
input when,
We had a meeting, yesterday actually, of the designated downtowns, and they had a number of specific suggestions around that, which I can, get to you.
that'd be great.
Yeah. We do support the inclusion of a pre-hearing process that you have in the bill where, people are able to get their issues out on the table before you actually go to the formal permitting process. We have quite a few concerns around the 2,000-foot road rule. We don't believe it makes sense the way it's written. The 800-foot road rule was extinguished in large part because it led to the development of spaghetti lots, which are long, narrow lots with driveways just under 800 feet, which was the trigger for Act 250. As this particular provision is written, a clustered development on the edge of a forest block in a rural community would seem to be pulled into Act 250 because you're counting all the driveways and all the roads around. You're not just talking about a 2,000-foot straight road into a forest block or wherever. You're talking about all the driveways that are associated with it. While we want to protect large parcels from fragmentation, there's also a need to establish what protection is important and what size of contiguous area of forest is necessary to protect. And we do believe that regulation of town forests needs to remain under the purview of the town. We did comment last year about the imprecise definition of connecting habitat, understanding that it's current language, land or water or both, that links patches of habitat. I think you need to define what a patch of habitat is. Climate adaptation requirements may be contrary to local bylaws and needs on small lots, particularly in more urbanized areas. The example that was given was that in Winooski, they have a code for their city. Not all of the city is in a designated downtown. And they have very small lots and very compact development. We've been there recently. And requiring orientation in a particular direction might be particularly problematic in terms of conforming to their form-based code. We have concerns with the proposal that unless a municipality responds to a request by the Natural Resources Board within 90 days regarding impacts to educational and municipal and governmental services, the development will be presumed to not have an unreasonable burden. The default, we think, should not be that there's no burden. And today, just looking at this educational services criterion, what is far different from when Act 250 was written is that unreasonable burden on educational services is essentially that there aren't enough students, and we continue to pay for infrastructure to support many more students than there are. You might presume, and I don't think you want to go into Act 46 or school law too much,
Thank you.
but I think you might want to give a few moments to what exactly are we talking about with respect to educational services. We do have a number of concerns about the proposal for forest-based enterprises, and especially around hours of operation and times of year. There are neighbors adjacent to forest-based operations. A lot of towns have restrictions around running when the school bus is running. along school bus routes, and there's certainly the issue of mud season all over the state. Not just with respect to logging trucks, but any heavy truck. So those are our major concerns. I will send you my testimony. I'll also send you the listings of the designations for, that I took from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, so that can inform your process as well. And I'll give you the websites for all of that.
Thank you very much. Are there questions for
Yeah, I have
Ms. Warren?
a quick one here.
Sure.
Could you expand a little bit more on what you would like to see with the road rule, so-called? You don't like the 2,000-foot one that's now in the bill?
I'm not sure that a road rule is a good, is going to achieve the result that whoever proposed it would like it to achieve. I don't know that a road rule, given everything else that's in Act 250, is necessary.
Other questions? Representative Odie and then McCullough.
You say within 90 days of default shouldn't be no burden. Is it that you think 90 days isn't long enough, or you're concerned about showing burden, or what's your recommendation?
Part of it is a bit of a disconnect between the way local governments work and the way Act 250 might work. So some planning commissions, presumably it would be the planning commission that makes that assessment, meet once a month. They have to review proposals that the timing might not be long enough.
What would be a
on
better
the other
timing?
hand, pardon?
What would you like for timing?
Well, we could do 120 days, but I think the larger question is if if the town doesn't respond to this, do you just take those issues off the table, or should the Natural Resources Board make some kind of determination about what the burden might be on governmental services?
I just see this as a conflict between, going 90 days, 120 days. People want a short process.
They do want a short process, yes.
90 days is not necessarily long enough, and it's
You do, so here's the thing, not every town actually would respond at all to that kind of a proposal. I mean, they don't today always send in to the Natural Resources Board or District Commission their assessment of governmental services. But I think that the result today, I'm getting too many negatives in my sentence, sorry, but the result today is not that then the District Commission just doesn't consider those issues at all.
So
Do you
you
see what I'm
think the
saying?
District Commission is considering those issues, but you
So the way
also
it's
think
written,
it's okay to have more than 90 days. I don't know.
if you look at the way it's written, unless they get, the way I'm looking at it, unless they get a response within 90 days, they're not going to consider burden on educational services or municipal or governmental services.
Representative McCullough.
So Karen, I'm going to follow a bit this line of disconnect for me. You heard it from me regarding Ed Larson's testimony. I do understand and appreciate and support the league's local control, always protecting the municipalities and protecting the ability of the citizens in the municipality and municipal government to control their own destiny, and I appreciate that and I support that. But our legislation in front of us does give municipalities more control in the designated downtown districts, which you like, and which I like, maybe with a few sideboards on it. As you mentioned, actually, there may be some things to that need to be added. But I'm mystified because I believe our district commissions are the epitome of local control. And so I'm actually mystified that the league has come out in favor of centralizing statewide planning in Montpelier. Could you talk about that?
You do have in the board, in this proposal, you do still have 6, I believe, district commissions who are addressing some of those regional issues. We agree with you that having some kind of regional approach that accounts for differences around the state is important, and it looks like you've taken that into account in this proposal. And as I mentioned, the way that a natural resources board is actually constituted and is going to make a huge difference. If you go to something like the Public Utility Commission, you're right, there's nothing there for citizens or people without a lot of resources to be able to get involved in that process.
I'd like, so this is an ask.
Okay.
I'd like you to go back to your board and point out that what they've just supported has 3 bureaucrats in Montpelier voting against 2 people in the district commissions, and 3-2 wins how often?
Regional commissions, right?
The district commissions, yeah. So the newly created Enhanced Resource Board has 3 professionals
Yeah.
who will be voting with 2 people from the district commissions.
The regional commission. I believe it's written that it's from the
I don't know
regional.
how you wrote it precisely, but Act 250 has
I didn't
district
write it.
commissions.
It says regional, but it's meaning district commissions.
Yeah.
Not the regional planning commission.
Not the
It's
regional
meaning
planning.
district, okay, I misunderstood.
Yeah,
Right.
because the
So-
same words were used, it's understand, others have been confused as well.
Yeah, so I think this is worthy of taking this back to the board.
Uh-huh.
3 bureaucrats in Montpelier outvote the 2 local from the
Well, you
board.
could flip it, you could be 3 local and 2 professional.
You could.
You take care of that problem.
I have a question for you. Oh, were you finished, Representative?
Yes, I am, thank you.
Have you you just said something that really struck me, the PUC has nothing for citizens. Have you participated in a PUC process and?
We've not been, well, actually, quite a few years ago, we were party to one PUC proceeding. But I've gone and listened a lot, but actually getting involved is, and I believe Mark Whitworth has been involved a few times, but is very costly. It's a very legal process, a very court-like process. You go there without an attorney, kind of at your peril. And it's not easy to find out what's going on. Their website is not particularly helpful. You have to have a password to get into it, which is not the case with the Natural Resources panel. If you actually want to look at any cases or details around it.
Do you know how you get a password?
Yeah, you just sign up for it. But it's another step that we think is sort of an unnecessary step, but it's just a very different process from what Act 250 is now, and not user-friendly.
So in kind of late-breaking news, yesterday this committee decided to look at some draft language around that would hopefully address some of the concerns that have been brought up over the years by multiple parties in the process of Act 250 review without centralizing with a board. And I don't know that you've had the.
I haven't
We
seen
just
that,
did
but
it,
I'll
so-
look.
right.
I'll look for it. Yeah.
So we're thinking of addressing some of the concerns by having district commissions go on the record.
Okay.
and supporting them with the necessary staff that they would need to do that and to get the information they need. And that would then still go through the environmental court, but our hope would be that it would address some of the issues that have been brought to us there with cost and timeliness, because if it's on the record, presumably you don't have to you're not starting over.
We have supported that in the past when it's been on the table.
Okay, so I just wanted you to know
Yeah.
that's out there, and we may be heading in that direction.
Okay, all right, excellent, thank you.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, committee, we're a little ahead, which is great, and Ellen just walked in, so let's take a break till 10:15 and start up promptly at 10:15 with Ellen. Thank you.